Welcome panelists, welcome attendees. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world today. Welcome to another episode of the DHIT Frequency, brought to you by the Digital Health Institute for Transformation, where game changers, status quo challengers, health transformers come together to talk about and imagine all the best practices, next practices, and all else digital health. I'm Michael Levy, DHIT's president, and your co-host today. We have an exciting panel, exciting program today. We're joined by 4 esteemed faculty members from the Assist Center who spend their time, their days, their career focused on extracting data and insights from the human body as we live 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we'll get into a very engaging conversation around where we are today in the world of wearable technologies and remote monitoring and where the future might lead us. I'm joined today by Adam Curry, Dr. Adam Curry, the Innovation Ecosystem Director for the Assist Center, who will not only be my co-host for today's program, but will join us over the next few months as we continue to deliver on the COVID Unites Us All session and series to focus and amplify the discussion around remote health monitoring and its role in the COVID pandemic and its role in the care of the future as we know it. Thanks, Adam. So grateful to have you co-host today and to join me on this journey.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I mean, it's exciting to be here and do this with you. As we've discussed, Assist and DHIT are really driving after the same goal to improve people's health and well-being through digital health technologies. And so we really appreciate how DHIT's building collaborations like this and driving innovation like we'll discuss today to generate real-world data that advances toward that goal. So we're excited to be working with DHIT to host this series of webinars focused on remote health monitoring. And we look forward to the coming weeks. So I appreciate it.
Go on, Adam. Before passing over to Adam to introduce his faculty, share a little bit more about the Assist Center and get underway, I'd like to continue as I do in each episode to send our energy, our thoughts to those on the front lines of the pandemic, to those who are fighting to save lives, to those who are fighting for their lives, and to those who are fighting to put food on the table and keep shelter over their families. We are here with you and we support you. I'd also like to thank our sponsors who believe in DHIT, support DHIT in our mission of maximizing health in communities across the nation and beyond by providing equal access to global advancements in care and believing in our vision of a world without health inequity.
Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to Bludor Group, a leading digital health agency supporting growth and product innovation through customer and market insights. Thank you to Tango AI, a powerful human-powered neural net that is the optimal combination of human and machine intelligence to help people achieve the right balance between humans and automation to optimize outcomes. And finally, Smashing Boxes, a creative technology firm with a strong emphasis on the design and engineering of web and mobile products.
All right, Adam, why don't you do us the honors and kick us off here?
Great. Before we dive in, I know not everybody is probably familiar with Assist. And for those who aren't, Assist is a National Science Foundation funded engineering research center. And we are developing self-powered and low-powered sensing systems for high-value applications, especially in healthcare, but also in fields like Internet of Things. So what that really means is we're developing technologies around different thrusts, and those things all come together with sensing systems. And so those thrusts include energy harvesting and storage, low power sensing, it's physiological, biochemical, which you'll hear a little bit about today, both of those, and environmental sensing, low power electronics that you'll hear about today as well, and integration and testing, which we're excited that you'll also get to hear about. So we're based at North Carolina State University, but Assist actually includes faculty and students from 8 different universities and representatives from about 25 member companies who support our work and give us guidance, and we just really appreciate them and how they support us. One of the defining characteristics of Assist is that we're driving toward commercialization. We're not just trying to do academic research, although that's definitely part of what we do at the universities, but we are looking at how those things address real-world needs and make it a priority to advance the market readiness levels of our technologies. So that's what's really exciting about working with DHIT on this seminar series and the virtual incubator that we're launching together. The series and the incubator are both focused on real-world needs, moving technologies to consumers and healthcare providers. So again, looking forward to this. With that background, excited to welcome 4 of the Assist professors today who are leading various areas of the center's research. We'll hear about low power electronics, as I mentioned, biochemical sensing, smart textiles, and body heat energy harvesting. Last thing before I introduce our panelists, want to let everybody know that we'll be entertaining questions and bringing those before our panelists today. So there's a Q&A section in Zoom. I invite you to be entering questions there as we go so we can present those to our panelists toward the end of the program. To begin today's discussion, we've invited each of our panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves and their work. We'll begin with Dr. Ben Calhoun. Dr. Calhoun is a professor at the University of Virginia. He leads the robust low power VLSI group at University of Virginia, and he also leads Assist low power systems on chip thrust. So getting at that low power electronics area that I mentioned. So Dr. Calhoun, I'll let you take it from here.
Great, thanks, Adam. Good morning, everyone. It's good to talk to you. I want to give you a very brief overview of the kind of work that happens in the low power electronics thrust of the Assist Center. And this slide gives some of the highlights from that work. So just for context, we're talking about integrated circuits here. So custom chips that we design in the university and then have fabricated in commercial foundries. We typically use TSMC in Taiwan, which is the world's largest integrated circuit foundry. And we design those chips to meet the application needs and the system needs of the center. And you'll hear about some of those system needs from my colleagues later this morning. The goal of our thrust is to build integrated circuits that provide the electronic functions of a self-powered, fully batteryless wireless sensor on the body. And that includes a lot of functions. It includes functions for actually harvesting the energy from the transducer and conditioning that energy, storing it in a capacitor, and then converting it into the regulated supply voltages that the rest of the electronics need. It includes radio communication so that we can send data off of the node and receive instructions to the node. It includes on-node processing so that we can extract information locally on the chips from the data streams that we're pulling from the sensors. And it includes sensor interfacing chips, such as analog front ends that connect to the sensing transducers and convert the information coming from them into digitized forms that we can use in the system. The main emphasis of our work is to provide the functionality we need while also really pushing what's possible in terms of power consumption. And we've been successful at lowering the power consumption very significantly, and I give a few highlights here. Overall, the systems on chip that we build and some of the companion chips that we put around that system on chip have reduced power so much that we're over 1,000 times lower power than what you can find off the shelf, specifically achieving active power consumption of electronics that are functioning, not idle, of less than 1 microwatt, when most commercial off-the-shelf products are more in the milliwatt range, 1,000 times higher. And just to highlight a few examples, you see some waveforms in the plot on the bottom right of this slide showing the output of PPG signals and EKG signals and ozone sensing, all concurrently sensed by an analog front end that for all 3 of those channels consumes less than a microwatt at 785 nanowatts. Even including the LED power that goes with the PPG, we have a system power of just 11 microwatts, which is about 60-fold less than any prior system that had comparable functionality. And on the system on chip, we have similar reductions in power. We've been able to demonstrate, for example, a microcontroller at just 1 nanowatt of power actively running code and the world's lowest power SRAM memory on chip, just 130 picowatts or 16 kbits of memory.
Great. It's been really exciting, being part of seeing how this stuff has progressed. And I know some of the challenges of bringing, these really optimized configurations to different technologies. But can you say a little bit about that? You develop these things for specific applications, but what's involved is we're looking at new applications, which of course we constantly are.
Sure. So there is certainly an application-specific element to wearables because, of course, the wearable, the problem you're trying to solve, the particular signal you're trying to sense will have some specific characteristics that will certainly influence the best solution for the chip. And the approach that we've taken in Assist is to use an architecture that has on chip that handles harvesting and management with separate chips that are designed on an application-specific basis to interface with sensors and to allow sort of a plug-and-play use of different radios so that you can meet different.
Yeah, great, thank you. Welcome Dr. Michael Danielle to tell us about his work next. Professor Danielle is at North Carolina State University. His primary research areas include not just wearable, but also implantable sensors, doing work on organ-on-a-chip models, and human interfaces with machines. He's applying soft nanomaterials to engineer devices that monitor and mimic and augment biological function. So it's some really cool stuff. He's going to tell us about some of the work that he's doing on the biochemical sensing side for Assist.
Thanks, Adam, for the introduction. Thank you, Michael, for the invitation to participate. So with the focus of this on COVID-19 and coming together and where wearables fit, I took a small segment of the work that we're doing for Assist, which is building wearable and mobile biochemical sensing. So when we think of wearables, we typically think of our Fitbits or our iWatches, or maybe even a Holter monitor for ECG or heart rate. We're trying to take that next step and sort of take your doctor's office clinical lab that's doing maybe blood work and put that on the body in some way. And not necessarily analyzing blood, but looking at sweat or interstitial fluid or these non or minimally invasive sources of information. And the one point that I'd like to highlight in our work is what we're trying to do is really multiplex these types of efforts. So when you go to the doctor and you get a blood panel drawn, they'll look at a lot of different targets. And we're trying to do that same thing in a wearable. So instead of just looking at one metric, we look at many metrics. And I kind of put a small title here of 1 + 1 = 10. So instead of just having one measurement at a time, when we have two different measurements, we have some synergistic response that we could generate. And then we can do diagnosis by pattern recognition. And so in the case of COVID-19 or other respiratory stresses and diseases, it's very interesting to monitor multiple aspects that aren't just directly diagnosing the disease. And one example that we work on a lot in the Assist Center is combining optical plus biochemical sensing. So the optical are things like the pulse oximetry or photoplasmathography. So the little clip they'll put on your finger at the hospital, or what the Apple Watch is doing. And we connect that with a biochemical sensor for lactate. And lactate is sort of what happens if your body's not breaking down glucose with enough oxygen. So it's a really fundamental insight into how your body's metabolism's working, maybe respiration's working. And by comparing these devices, we can have a more robust readout of the wearer's physiology. And so we work with collaborators across the Assist Center in building the sensor hardware and then integrating flexible, robust longitudinal measurements with very low power sensing. So the idea is to do these biochemical and photonic measurements for days or weeks at a time. And so we're really at the integration portion of the center, taking sensors with the hardware that's very low power and deploying it on human subjects to make correlation measurements about their health.
Yeah, great. You mentioned lactate. I know there's been some stuff around glucose. Are there limitations to the kinds of biochemicals that you can detect with a platform like this?
For sure, there's always some limitations, but there's sort of this emerging front in the field of trying to figure out what is in, let's say, sweat or interstitial fluid or even saliva, these minimally invasive fluids, and how does that correlate back to the systemic physiology. And so these really small metabolites, so we could think of things like glucose and lactate, urea. There's efforts in the Assist Center on wound dressings or chronic wounds. They are present in almost all the body fluids, so they're easy to access, and we're lucky because they're also the easier targets to build sensors for. And so we can reach out to these basal metabolic markers and then try to correlate those with maybe higher order pathology. So things like infectious disease or sepsis or other types of infection. So it's kind of a marketplace, I'll say, to go in and find out what's in the different fluids. And then it also drives our technology to make it more sensitive, smaller limit of detection, lower power, because there might only be a small quantity in the target fluid, but we try to go get it by different engineering routes. Yeah, it's cool. It's something you just don't see in wearables now, which you kind of allude to, the ability to monitor those things, to monitor those over the long term. So I appreciate that introduction. Next, I want to welcome Professor Jess Jur. Dr. Jur is a professor in the College of Textiles at North Carolina State University. He leads the Nano Extended Textiles research team, and they're looking at smart textile platforms that enable improved material integration. They think about wearability, manufacturability, communication, and they're bringing together all these different technologies of energy harvesting and storage and sensing. So anyway, some really cool stuff. Looking forward to hearing from Dr. Jur. Go ahead.
All right, thanks, Adam. Appreciate it. So yeah, as you mentioned, my name's Jess Jur. I'm a faculty member in the Wilson College of Textiles here at NC State, which is notably the only college of textiles in the United States. We've seen quite a change within our industry within the past 30 to 40 years, and probably actually longer than that. And we're seeing continued evolution, and smart textiles like this are sort of like helping lead the way for some of that evolution. So my research team, which consists of graduate students as well as project designers that work with industry, we have our clothes are basically our platform. And we explore our clothes as a research platform to integrate different types of sensing technologies and energy harvesting technologies. And we explore and what I mean by using those as an R&D platform is we actually look at the device to textile design relationships within strategic studies. So for example, in the shirt that you see up there on the left, we have different paneling designs that are around the electrodes that we have that allow us to understand how we might be able to reduce things like motion artifacts within the garment as the person's moving in real life. Now, the other thing that's really kind of cool about smart textiles, and one of the reasons why I guess this is a growing industry and a preferred or potential preferred route for wearable electronics, is the fact that you can actually go and distribute different sensing technologies across the garment. Link them all up into a single location that would have electronics like what Ben's making, and also energy harvesters or sensors like my other colleagues on the call are developing. And we can link them all up into a single location. And as a low power strategy, that allows for a single Bluetooth communication channel or whatever data communication channel that you would want. You can do all the processing on a single location, and that allows for these low power strategies to actually be developed. So we look at how we can process those materials into the garment in both durable and low-cost processing strategies. One of the biggest challenges for smart textiles and textiles in general is basically the margins on the products that you actually manufacture. And now we're adding pretty expensive components into these garments, and so we have to look at the right strategies for actually processing materials. We also are developing a materials database that allows for easy selection of materials as you choose either the different types of sensors or different types of routes for routing the electronics within the garment. Of course, within the Assist Center, we are also encouraging startup company formations, and so recently we started a startup company called Next Systems Research and Development, where we're actually looking at these smart garments for industrial applications for reducing stress or for managing stress, as well as improving workforce decisions. And part of this is really, or the key element to this is actually a data management system. So it's actually pretty well known that within a wearable device, data actually represents about 90% of the value of that wearable device. And so how you manage that data is very key. And of course, you can have not only data coming from one wearable or maybe multiple wearables, but you can also have data that's coming from other data streams. And so how do you tap into that, create a management system around that data, and then perform the analytics that help improve those efficiencies? And that's one of the focuses of the Next Systems group. And we actually are licensing technology developed out of Assist. So with that, Adam, I'll give it back to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's really highlights what I mentioned earlier about commercialization. As Jess said, that's where we're trying to take these technologies. Jess, can you just say a little bit briefly about how we are benchmarking, comparing these to traditional ECG monitors, for instance?
Yeah, so the true kind of the gold standard benchmark is the Holter monitor, so when we do our studies, we actually, and of course the electrodes wise, it's the hydrogel sticky electrodes that leave these big red welts on you at the end of the day. And so we look at our technologies in comparison in terms of how long you could actually have those measurements. So the hydrogel electrodes, for example, that are produced mainly by 3M. They dry out over time. Our electrodes can have a longer time in which they can be operated, and then we can also go and wash our electrodes within our garment, which is something you can't really quite do with the hydrogel electrode. But from a Holter monitor perspective, it is a tough comparison because we are. To get our low power strategy, we have a minimum number of electrodes. We're also doing different types of data processing than something like a Holter monitor would produce. But still, if we can we benchmark ourselves up against the accuracy of how well we can get our heart rate variability so that medical professionals can actually make a life-changing decision on the patient that's wearing this.
Yeah, good deal. Lastly, we have Dr. Mehmet Ozturk. Professor Ozturk is a professor of electrical engineering at North Carolina State University. His research is in the area of new materials and processes and device structures for nanoelectronics. He also leads the development of Assist flexible thermoelectric platform for body heat energy harvesting. So I think he's going to talk to us about that. Dr. Ozturk.
Thank you, Adam, for the introduction. As Adam mentioned, Assist is working toward long-term continuous monitoring of patients by harvesting energy from the body and or the environment. And our ultimate goal is to completely eliminate these batteries that need frequent charging or replacement. We believe these devices will fundamentally change the way we manage chronic diseases and provide invaluable feedback to medical teams and applications such as post-operative care. So here at NC State, we're working on harvesting body heat using a phenomenon well known as thermoelectricity. So what is thermoelectricity? If you look at the top left corner of the slides, there's a block of semiconductor placed on a heat source. And the heat travels through the semiconductor and released to the ambient from the other side. This heat flow establishes a temperature differential between the two ends, which actually produces a voltage called the seebeck voltage between the two ends of the device. And this voltage is actually directly proportional to this temperature differential. So the voltage is small, but fortunately, by connecting a number of these semiconductor elements, the voltage can be substantially increased. The figure next to the block of semiconductor shows a typical thermoelectric module. In this module, we have a whole bunch of legs, and they're sandwiched between two thermally conductive plates, which also carry the metal interconnects used to connect the legs in series. So in theory, if we place such a device on the human body, we should be able to harvest body energy by establishing a continuous heat flow from the body to the ambient. But unfortunately, the human body is not flat, and it is not desirable to try to use these rigid devices on the human body. So the solution that a lot of people are interested in is to develop a flexible thermoelectric module that conforms to the human body. So to accomplish this, we proposed and developed a unique approach, which relies on the same semiconductor elements used in rigid devices. But instead of using rigid interconnects, we use a liquid metal, which provides excellent stretchability to the device because it's a liquid. The liquid metal itself is a eutectic mixture of gallium and indium, and it's a liquid at room temperature. So how do we fabricate this device? After we take the legs and connect them in series using the liquid metal interconnects, we embed the whole structure in a stretchable silicon, and that's the figure at the bottom left corner. And then right next to it, you can see a typical flexible thermoelectric device. It is a bit more complicated than the figure on the left because we are actually using different silicones optimized for the thermal engineering needs of the device. But there are all silicones with low or high thermal conductivities. So, and my final figure shows what happens if you put a device like this on the human body. Here we show the power density, that is the power generated by the device on the human wrist per unit centimeter square. And we have three different scenarios. In the first segment, the person is stationary, so there is no air motion. In the second segment, the person is walking at 0.7 meters per second, which is typical slow walking speed. And as you can see, the power density goes up. And then the last segment is 1.2 meters per second. So the person is walking faster, there's more air motion. So why does this matter? It matters because the motion provides forced convection, and the forced convection increases the efficiency of heat release from the cold side of the device, and eventually the temperature differential goes up with motion. So this approach has several key commercialization advantages. First and foremost, we do not need to develop new flexible thermoelectric materials. we are able to rely on decades of research done on these materials to optimize them. Second, the fabrication of this device closely mimics rigid TEG manufacturing, using some of the same tools used to fabricate commercial devices. And finally, the approach is compatible with roll-to-roll manufacturing, which we believe has the capacity to revolutionize tech manufacturing or module manufacturing in general by substantially reducing the manufacturing cost. Of course, these devices producing maybe hundreds of microwatts on a wrist or an armband, the energy is not that much, but combining this harvested energy with low power electronics that Ben talked about and low power sensors that Michael talked about, we are able to produce a complete system that not only senses but communicates the data with the environment as well. Thank you.
Yeah, that's been one of the exciting things you think about, or it's all referenced in Jess's presentation, this self-powered ECG monitoring shirt, and it uses this. And we've seen this move closer to where I talked about market readiness, where it would be ready for licensing and for somebody to take out and commercialize and bring to market. So really cool technology, has enabled a lot. So Michael, Levy, we've heard a range of technologies, some really cool enabling stuff. Interested to hear your thoughts.
Well, first off, panelists, thank you so much, both for being here today and dedicating your time and energy to this incredible work. I mean, my mind is really blown right now. The wheels are turning. I'm having a hard time, kind of imagining a future that looks anything like ours today. Maybe I could direct my first question to Dr. Jur and Dr. Danielle, and maybe let's reach out 10 years from now, 2030, and we've got another decade of development, validation, and cultural, let's say, alignment to adopting these technologies. Are we walking around with just 24/7 surveillance on our lactate, and are we buying this from Banana Republic and J. Crew? I mean, what's life like in 2030 when this becomes the norm?
Mike, I'll let you attack this first on the sensor side, but I'll have to make a point that it's probably not going to be J. Crew considering their current financial status.
Or is that where they innovate?
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, I kind of start where Jess does, and I think it's highest need. So if we're really projecting 10 years, there's going to be two big breakthroughs, I think, that are going to be needed, or viewpoints that'll come out. Assuming all the really fundamental science gets worked out. So the issues with the sensing and how the devices work and how they would work. I think two of the biggest use cases or considerations will be what's the data really telling us? So what's the reliability? So when we're doing these types of things where we have 4, 5, 6 sensors and we're integrating or fusing a lot of data together, we have to really consider the reliability of that data and then how it's going to be used. So we work very much in the medical space where we're looking to diagnose a pathology or determine a prognosis. So the quality of that decision, I think, is going to be a bigger turning point than can I get the number out of a sensor? And so while I don't see it necessarily tracking and monitoring everyone sort of in the consumer space, I think in 10 years in the very pointed medical space, whether it's population surveillance, and I use that word more from the health perspective, I think that'll be very important, but also sort of niche patient care. So one thing we talk about in Assist a lot is tracking treatment. So if we provide a treatment, whether it's a pharmaceutical intervention or other intervention, how well is that performing? Also, how well is the person partaking in that intervention? And then using that sort of collected surveillance data to say, yeah, this intervention worked on 70% of the population during these months, and it didn't work during this period, and it worked towards this period. So I think that's where I see in the next 10 years, the biochemical side really getting its fingers into how we deliver healthcare. Hopefully, so, that's what I view it.
Yeah, so, in other words, an adjunct to the prescribed pharmaceutical to assist in medication adherence and perhaps to accelerate real world evidence.
Exactly. So I think in the next 10 years, we'll see it as a supporting role in healthcare. And then beyond that, potentially as a decision maker, projecting sort of sci-fi into the future where it's actually making the call.
That's it.
Just
yeah. So I agree. I agree with Michael 100%. It's really about it kind of comes down to the use case of the data that's going to be presented to the patient as well as to the physician that's trying to help out that patient. You look at like 3 months ago on how we actually went to the doctor has significantly changed now. A lot of it's remote healthcare and telemedicine. I think that trend, I think that this COVID-19 is kind of like, expressed the trend and probably accelerated that trend towards remote care just a lot quicker. And of course, it's amazing when we go to the hospital and how little data that we actually get and how informed decisions are actually made on that little snapshot of your time at that one moment, in which the doctor takes a stethoscope and presses it up against your chest for 3 seconds. It's insane. And so, I think that if you, with the increased amount of data, I think that people are going to want to obviously see the benefits of it, and also want to be able to protect their own privacy. Of course, that goes into a lot of how the data is managed and how the healthcare industry is going to have to evolve towards data security. But then there's also right now our main wearable electronic out there is a Fitbit, or something around that, or wrist-worn watch, or what we think about as like accessory-based technologies. But what's really missing towards this is a personalization of that wearable device so that you can get the right amount, the right data, or for that particular right scenario, whether it be like a pre-op or post-op data collection. And so there's going to be this personalization for our wearable electronics, which I think is going to help drive this. And then, of course, it's going to be cost too. We don't want to necessarily cost broad sets of the population out of having access to these technologies. And so we're going to end up having to really take costs into consideration. I know that for smart garment technologies, people are, if you want electronics in it, people are only expecting to have a 10% increase in that regular garment cost. So if you have like an Under Armour shirt like I have on, that's probably around $60, somebody's not going to pay over $66 in order to make that thing usable for them in terms of like some sort of like sports or health monitoring. So that really is a significant constraint, and putting these towards healthcare, you don't want to drive up healthcare costs just because you have a lot more data sensors coming towards you. So I think that we are driving towards this new future where we're going to have a lot more data, as Michael said, but I think it's a lot of the customization as well as the driving cost down that's going to really kind of be the I guess the big challenges or the big bridges that we have to overcome.
Yeah, it's cool to see that, forward look, and of course, that's where we're headed. We're working at that front end so that we can get there. But of course, there are steps to get there. Dr. Oster, Dr. Calhoun, you're working on, some of those fundamental technologies as Dr. Danielle and Jura are. Curious for your perspective on what does it take to get there? Either partnerships, technology development, commercial, transition. How do we make that happen?
You want to start?
Sure. Thanks, Mehmet. Yeah, it's a great question, Adam. Commercializing any academic technology is really challenging. I've done this myself, so I know that the gap between a proof of concept and a demonstration of technology in the university relative to a commercial product is very large. I think it's going to go one of two directions for wearables. The first direction is going to be application specific and driven by a vertically integrated product that is a particular solution to a specific problem. And to echo what Jess and Michael were saying, those first problems that are solved are going to be driven by need, high consequence kinds of issues. And that vertically driven application solution will both, I think, pull the underlying technology like myoelectronics and MEMS harvesters and sort of increase their technology readiness, but also connect them up into a system that solves some of the other problems, including just what exactly are we looking for here and what outcomes do we want. So that's one major direction that I think will happen in wearables. That's how these technologies will first hit the market. The other direction is more of a horizontal play. I call it tech platform kind of play. For chips, that might look like a flexible chip module with software support that could serve a host of different needs in a particular subspace for wearables. I think that could happen, but I think that approach is easier to pull off with non-wearable applications like environmental monitoring or more generic Internet of Things, just because wearables have so many other factors like we've been talking about, usability and comfort and all these kinds of other issues that make the applications more sort of amenable to the vertical integration approach.
Okay. Go ahead, Adam.
I was just going to say the adjacent market development of technology feeding in. That's an interesting point. I was going to throw it back to you, Dr. Oster.
Okay, thank you, Adam. As I mentioned, the advantage of this technology is that we are using the existing semiconductor materials used by rigid TEG manufacturers. That's a huge advantage because before this, a lot of people try to create flexible thermoelectric materials, but they're basically starting from scratch, and their power densities were very, very low to be practical. Even with the power densities we're able to generate with these devices, as I mentioned, it is absolutely essential to develop low power electronics that Ben talked about. So we are, for instance, right now looking at putting together a system using commercial components for quick release. A system like that consumes over 1 milliwatt of power. And that becomes challenging to harvest. But last summer when we demonstrated this shirt that Jess talked about, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but the power consumption was below 50 microwatts. So it is, to commercialize this technology, I think we have to, people have to see the application, and it should be believable, and I think it's connected to low power sensors and electronics very closely. On the manufacturing side, if you look at the thermoelectric companies, there are two types of companies. The first one, the traditional one, they basically build modules and they sell them on the market without worrying about how they're going to be used. And then there are other companies which not only fabricate their thermoelectric devices, but also they work on an application. For instance, in North Carolina, we have Phononic using thermoelectric devices for commercial refrigeration. In my opinion, these companies are more successful than the traditional companies, and their growth cycle is much faster. And especially in the medical field, because it is so new and people are not familiar with the technology, I think it is more realistic to have a company that has an application in mind and has the capability to produce these devices. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, very helpful. I think that view toward how do we get it there, it's key. I know we want to make time for audience Q&A, and I've seen a couple of questions come up there. Michael, you want to call those out?
Yeah, well, and maybe piggyback on Dr. Öztürk's point and stream on the commercialization side, picking one from an audience member named Eric Close. He says, incredible work, number one. Number two, how does the Assist Center connect with startups that may be interested in their technology? With the extreme heat becoming a problem, is there an application that can be commercialized? Anyone want to pick up that one? Adam, you want to maybe jump in on the commercialization front and how startups can engage with the Assist Center, and then any panelists want to jump in on thoughts on heat becoming a problem.
Yeah, I love the question. This is, of course, something that we drive toward. Love having those kind of conversations and enabling those transfers of technology. Our website is assistcenter.org, and you'll see that at the end of the presentation today as well. There's contact information there. We'd love to follow up with anybody who's interested in commercialization, even at an exploration level. But to be short about it, we have a lot of resources at the university. It's a great community, within the triangle and even broader to help with that and help with funding to do that. So a lot of resources. And I'll turn it back to the panel for the application side of this.
Well, let me just I'll make a quick comment here, just to kind of follow up Adam. It is, and this kind of Mehmet and Ben were kind of saying the same thing, is, the Assist Center really is putting these faculty that have kind of this great research, usually or sometimes isolated, they're putting them together, or putting all this research together and showing how individual components can fit into a system. And that's actually represents a huge risk for startups, is not knowing exactly where your technology goes or how your technology fits into a larger system. So I think that we can't underscore the importance of understanding that ecosystem enough. And what are the challenges around you so that you can advance your technology. I think that's, through the conversations that we have within our site visits, and our industry meetings and some of the other industry events, I really think that's some of the real benefit that's applied to the companies.
Any other thoughts from the
panel?
panel?
Thanks for that addition.
All right, here's a second one from Sudhir Sharma. This is directed to Dr. Calhoun. Are there any thermal issues you see with your work specifically, and I guess the advancement of?
Yeah, that's a great question. A challenge for all kinds of electronics is how will they perform across temperature. So a couple of comments. First, for wearables, we have one thing going for us, which is that for a technology that's on the body, the temperature range is actually quite a bit smaller than what you can find in, for example, an industrial temp spec or a military temp spec. So that's an advantage that we can leverage. But absolutely, electronics are sensitive to temperature, and a good part of the work that we do is digging into circuit topologies and architecture, system architectures that give you robustness to temperature. So for example, we've built a number of devices that can be stable across temperature from, minus 20 up to, 50 or 60 C. And then for other components, we'll work on a more limited range if we know that, for example, an EKG sensor is going to be right on the body or close to the skin, where you're less likely to see super cold or super hot temperatures.
Good deal. Another one that I saw come in is about pulse oximetry in particular. I know, Dr. Danielle, this is an area that you've tied into. The question is, it's becoming interesting, pulse oximetry that is, because the problem with COVID is reduced blood oxygen, which is leading to other problems. Is the pulse ox wireless to a digital health app, and kind of where do you see that fitting into chronic treatment or treatments like for COVID?
Yeah, thanks, Adam, and thanks for the viewer for the question. So yeah, I think that's spot on with what I was showing before, which is you have this infectious disease which manifests as respiratory distress, and that's going to affect blood oxygen. So it's sort of this multiple stages removed, but we could make a more common measurement, which is pulse oximetry, and try to correlate it. So that's kind of right in line with what we're thinking. Our current pulse oximeter setup is a thin film patch. It is wireless. In principle, it can hook up to other digital health apps. So all of our wearables in the biochemical space are wireless, usually Bluetooth, some Wi-Fi sort of prototypes in the works. And the pulse ox as itself, as I mentioned, sort of tells you one bit of information. The pulse ox plus the lactate now tells you, yeah, the lungs aren't working properly. You're basically, not only are the lungs not working properly, but then the cardiovascular system isn't right? You're not getting oxygen to tissue. So there's pulse ox, and then we work with a collaborator, Dr. Albert Bosker in the CIS Center as well. And he does a little bit of other work in what's called NIR, so that's local tissue oxygenation. And so it's the same hardware, but two measurements on the body, and two measurements that tell you very different things. And these have sort of a nice story that we're in collaboration, just going back to one of the earlier questions, with a company out in California, a smaller startup that we collaborated with as a CIS Center and as faculty to take that technology, a chemical technology they had, and develop new lower power wearable hardware for their tech. So that's something the CIS Center also has kind of worked in, specifically, oddly enough, in this tissue and pulse oxygen regime.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into, I'm getting a little bit of echo there, a great segue into the future seminars that we have coming up. Erica, you're not a plant, but I appreciate how the question will segue into our next webinar, where we're looking at pulse oximetry and pulmonary health in general with wearables. So good thing to look forward to. Any other questions you want to field, Michael?
Well, I think, to that point of teeing up the virtual incubator and potential resources to help the community, we have another audience question from Madhavi Reddy that says, there's a project proposal. Is there resources to help design, create prototypes? What does this CIS Center support from an ecosystem perspective today to advance some of these ideas? And then, naturally, as we're launching this virtual incubator, the goal is to incubate and accelerate ideas across the ecosystem itself. But Adam, do you want to maybe take this one or pass it off?
Yeah, I can take that one. So working on collaborative research with companies is a huge part of what we do. And we can do that a couple of ways, where it's well aligned with research already, licensing, that sort of thing. Sometimes there's collaborative funding proposals, like for small business research grants. Sometimes those line up well. Sometimes companies just come and sponsor projects that are well aligned. So that's always exciting. But you know, as Michael Levy was just referencing, one of the things we're trying to do is drive innovation and move these technologies through multiple channels and technologies like these. So to drive innovation, we are you know, kind of enabling and helping drive this incubator so that those connections can be made between technologists, small companies, large companies, clinicians who see the needs. So look forward to that. Again, happy to discuss particulars. Reach out to us through our website, reach out to me directly on the industry tab. But yeah, definitely moving technologies forward is part of our goal.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. And, you know, panelists, you know, thank you so much again for joining us. Incredible work. This is just the beginning of our journey, driving awareness and increasing connections into your research center and building roads out to service as a impact center and a road to impact for our community, not just in this pandemic, but for many years thereafter. Thank you so much. And again, thank you to our sponsors, Blue Door Group, Tanjo.ai, and Smashing Boxes. We could not be doing what we are doing without the support of these great companies. And naturally, we will and always welcome new sponsors and augmented sponsors and partners along the way, which brings us to our next virtual webinar series here, focused on remote pulmonary monitoring, May 29th, 2 weeks from today, same time, 9 a.m. Eastern. We've got a great panel lined up, more details to come out next Wednesday through our biweekly DHIT Digest newsletter and thereafter through many different channels. We're going to be taking a pretty standard approach to the panel makeup with a industry member, a technologist, and a clinician / public health subject matter expertise as we work through many different condition and or service line areas all around health monitoring, remote monitoring, and the use of advanced emerging remote technologies. So stay tuned on that. And then, you know, really kicking off on the 29th and moving forward, you know, in partnership with the Assist Center, in partnership with a number of partners to be announced again later next week. We're launching this virtual incubator where, you know, the goal is to call upon the ecosystem, all of you in audience, your mothers, your fathers, your brothers, your sisters, your children. This is an all hands on deck reality, open innovation, ecosystem collaboration. We are trying to build a unifying voice and a unifying process to match technologies, ideas, funding, problem statements, et cetera, to our ecosystem here to help support and facilitate, again, the pandemic that we're dealing with today, as well as the pandemic of our health crisis in America and across the world. So please visit dhitglobal.org/incubator for more information, as well as I encourage a visit to the assistcenter.org for more information about technologies you've heard today and to engage in and connect. Adam, thank you so much for co-hosting with me. It was a pleasure sharing time and sharing this process. Thank you so much.
Yeah, likewise. It's exciting to come together, bring these technologies and different perspectives together. Appreciate DHIT, appreciate you joining with us on this.
All right, well, on behalf of DHIT and the Assist and DHIT Frequency, we are tuning out. Cheers.